Welcome to Nerdy Optimism
where everyone has a story,
with Dr. Q.
and Dr. J. So welcome to Nerdy Optimism. I am Dr. J.
And I'm Dr. Q.
So this is a different scenario for us this evening. Normally you see us, we have a esteemed guest and we are giving them the forum to talk about their story. Everyone has a story, right? But today we have a different type of treat for you. So the Fearless campaign, with Dr. Q and myself, we started a few months ago. A campaign to where we're wanting to educate you on mental health, bring you awareness, and lastly, advocate. That's our whole premise behind things. And so we started off educating, telling you what depression is, anxiety is, giving a platform of awareness. We've had several people come in and tell their story. Now we're getting to that point of how can we advocate even more to help us as we go on to these next level. We recently had a presentation to where we discuss the perils and trials of mental health. And one thing that came up was how poverty has such a huge impact and how mental health can have this negative connotation, this negative impact on a person's overall well-being. And so we wanted to have a conversation around that and its advocacies. And so we wanted to have a different conversation tonight, right, Dr. Q?
That's right. So thank you, Shannon, for that explanation. And we really want to, like Shannon said, get into advocacy. And when we think about mental health, that's an outcome, right? So what happens before that are triggering things, and we think of those social determinants of health that come into play, and we think about physical health and mental health. So when we think about your economic stability, your neighborhood context, or your social and community context, all of those come into play. And those are the areas in which we really need to think about advocating and then policy implications.
Absolutely. So I guess without further ado, we have Mr. Clifford Stockton III with us today. And Mr. Stockton, thank you for coming.
Well, thank you for having me, Dr. Jackson, and Dr. Harvey. I really appreciate the opportunity. I think it's really important the things you all just shared as it related to outcomes and as it relates to what we do to get to those outcomes and those social determinants of health. We have to make sure that we're a part of our community. And I think a little bit more of this conversation is going to dive into how we can do that in a positive way and how we can implement change by doing that and really take ownership in the communities that we live in and move towards a national agenda of looking at and actualizing the things that we want to actually see in our communities. And so, my name is Clifford Stockton III, as Dr. Jackson shared, and a little bit about me, born and raised in Indianapolis, Indiana, and split time throughout that time in Memphis, Tennessee, and went to a charter school in Indianapolis, Indiana, and worked really hard in an advanced curriculum to graduate basically 2 years early and be able to take college classes in high school. Left that space and went to school in the College of Worcester, Ohio, about 15 minutes south of Akron, 45 minutes from Cleveland, small liberal arts college there. And really got to understand in that environment what it was like to be really one of a few people of color in a larger community, and then also how to make change in that environment. but then, transferred into Butler University back home in Indianapolis. And after my undergraduate career, went on to teach at that same network of schools in Indianapolis, and really got to see some of the disparities that we're going to talk about today, and sort of how to implement on a micro level changes and helping folks that need that type of support in the classroom and in the educational environment. But then also got to learn a little bit more about how to impact change on the macro level as it relates to folks and advocacy and moving things forward here in Memphis, Tennessee, with the opportunity to be with the Memphis Education Fund that funded policy and education reform efforts here in Shelby County. And gave millions of dollars to organizations to help support that work and really be more of a harbor master in the space to unify the coalition of work being done around education reform as it relates to human capital. So access to high quality individuals who are wanting to work in the education space, from the classroom all the way up to the boardroom. And then making sure that from an advocacy standpoint, there were organizations that were situationed to support individuals in finding their voice and being able to advocate for issues in their communities. But then also we focused in on technical assistance work, so training and preparing teachers through alternative programming, and then also through direct assistance in their buildings as it related to supports around operations, academics, and other supports. And so that was a little bit about me and some of the space and the work that I've done. I think Dr. Jackson shared earlier, I have run for political office recently, coming off of cycle, and learned a lot about how to really put activism and community advocacy into a vessel of hopefully change for the community at the position I was running for at the state legislature level, right? And so right now I do some consulting, and I do some still education reform work for an organization called TNTP, the New Teacher Project. And so just a little bit about me. So yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that backdrop of Mr. Stockton. So well versed. Had the opportunity to run that same track with you for many years now, and it's always great to get a chance to sit and chat with you, because I always feel like I leave with something. So hopefully our audience get that same feeling in their bellies when they're done with this session as well.
I'm hoping so.
We'll get this party started with just a few lead-in questions, and then we'll just let the night take us where it will. Dr. Q, you want to start us off with a few questions, or I can? Why don't you go ahead and start?
Okay, sure. So a lot of times when we speak about advocacy and thinking about how things work, it can be very overwhelming, and the process is really not clear. And some of the recent things that are happening, that we're hearing about and that we're experiencing, are very troubling. So my first question is, for communities of color, how do we overcome not having a voice in decisions being made for our communities by those who are actually outside of our communities?
That's such a great question, Dr. Harvey. I just want to thank you for the question. I think coming off of cycle, I like to call myself a recovering candidate. Coming off cycle, I think I have to say the bottom line is we have to vote, right? Vote, 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 asterisk, vote, vote, vote. And so I think,
hashtag vote.
Hashtag vote, @ vote, everything we can do to vote. And I think not just vote in our federal elections that we happen to have every 4 years, right? But vote in every single opportunity that is given and allowed to us. I think a lot of us forget, and maybe not all of us, but some of us forget the sacrifices that our ancestors made and that folks in our communities made to have the right to vote. And, from suffrage on down to the Civil Rights Act. And so I think what we have to focus on as a community is seizing that opportunity, right? And it's not just an opportunity. I wrote a lot about in my campaign, the obligation that is being a citizen, right? Not just the rights that come with being a citizen, right? Those are clear, right? Those are, enumerated in our Constitution. But what are our obligations, as it comes to those rights, right? And so voting is one of them. Being informed is another. Making sure we know what's going on in our community, and then holding folks accountable. right? And so I think that's very important. We have to advance policies and solutions in the Mid-South, especially in Tennessee, where we have a Republican supermajority in not only our state legislature, but in many state and local governance systems. We have to understand that in order to achieve our policy goals, our shared policy goals, right? These are goals that not just people of color benefit from, but all people benefit from, and the research proves this, right? We have to commit to building the capacity of our communities and organizations of color to successfully advance policy agendas. And that's fluffy. That's great, but what does that mean, right? We build capacity of those community members, those organizations, by participating, by sharing something on Facebook that is aligned to what they're working on, by attending their workshops, by being a community member that wants to be engaged and be a part of that process, and then making sure our communities understand their power. A lot of times when we talk about advocacy, individuals don't understand the power that they have in the system. They think that the elected official has the power, when in reality, you endow them with the power with your vote. Whether you elected them or not, they still represent you as a representative of government. And so we have to build that capacity. The second thing is reforming policy practices to ensure authentic community engagement of the communities most directly impacted by the policy change. And I think that's important, because when we talk about how policy affects one population of people differently than it affects another population of people, we have to make sure we understand that we are just as responsible for the policy that those representatives pass and put into law as they are for passing them and putting them into law. So that accountability, that check is your ability to vote, right? Goes right back up into the ability to vote. And then the next thing we have to focus on is shifting the discourse, the conversation, to the centralized voices of communities of color, in not just the policies, but the conversations that we're having on a regular basis, right? We all interact with individuals that we work with, that we live nearby, that we our students, our kids go to school with, and we have to be having these conversations, right? We can't expect things to change without a discourse around how we want them to change, and then the pressure to actualize that change, right? Change isn't going to happen overnight, but it is a building process that we have to build upon and be a part of from the beginning to the end. And so the next thing I think is essential is building partnerships and coalitions with allied individuals and organizations. So, I think this is a great example of that right here, right? We are a group of individuals who have common interests, and we're allying, we're working together to get a common message out, right? And so that's one thing that everyone that can be a part of, everyone that's in our community or outside of our community can be a part of in one way or another. And so I think those things are really important. The next thing I want to talk about is, excuse me, together, we can create a policy environment that supports all Tennesseans, right? That supports everybody in the Mid-South. Additionally, we have to envision connected, balanced, and healthy and thriving communities. Our community and our economic development priorities are really two intersecting areas of work, right? We can't think of them as disjointed. They're two things that are connected. And so, when we talk about focusing on specific areas of work like anti-displacement, environmental justice, criminal justice reform, education reform, we're talking about things that are really connected. And when we try and attack them singularly, we get individual outcomes when we're looking for a structured outcome, an overall outcome. And so we have to work on those things in concurrence with one another, right? I think that's really important. And so in order to achieve our vision for what the Mid-South needs to look like, the work needs to be shifting mainstream environmental discourse to centralize the voices of, the most impacted environmental injustice or climate change or educational change. Who are the marginalized? Who are the people that are suffering the most, and how is this policy impacting them, right? That's how we need to look at it. That's the lens we need to look at it. But then we need to build the leadership capacity of the communities of color in our communities, our individual communities and communities of color, and act to lead on environmental and climate change issues and criminal justice reform issues and education reform issues. And then we need to make sure that we are strengthening the relationships and the partnerships between those organizations, and making sure that we increase the investments and not just financial fiduciary investments, but the time investments, the attention that we give, the coverage that they get in media of the different organizations of color that are targeted to eliminate, the racial and environmental inequities that we see in our community. So we really have to focus on those pieces as a whole, and that's what makes the most sense. And honestly, that's what the research has proven is effective, right? We can't go along focusing on small potatoes when we have a whole range of issues that are in front of us that are literally connected. And so, as it relates to our schools being closed, that's connected to a greater issue of funding and disparity as it relates to our schools. The ability to get out COVID vaccines in communities of color as it relates to the same ability to do that in communities that are more affluent, that's related to a direct structural issue that we need to focus in on to start solving for that and find the root cause.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. That was really insightful and very helpful. And it kind of touched on my next question, actually. So we have various communities, and we're speaking about communities of color, that majority of color. However, I live in a community that is majority white. And it's really interesting when you're trying to advocate when you're the minority in that community. So I was wondering, and Dr. Jackson and I actually were talking about this, because outside of Shelby and Davidson County, right, everything in Tennessee is going to be majority white. So I'm in the Rutherford County area. But how do we advocate for decisions that are good for all people and not just for some, when we are that minority in the community, especially when it comes to decisions that are detrimental to our health and well-being?
Absolutely. It does tie into your previous question. And I think it's important. And I think I shared a little bit about my background educationally. So the College of Worcester is a majority white town, right? And I think I was one of maybe 30, maybe 100 at the crux of Black students there. So I had to really figure out, how do I participate, right? And then also affect change in the way that I think is important. And so there's an article in the British Journal of Social Work called Advocacy for Black and Minority Ethnic Communities. It's written by Allison Bowes and Duncan Sim. And it outlines just how recent policy has promoted advocacy as a means for promoting social justice for many disadvantaged groups, right? Yet advocacy is contested. It's a contested concept. People, literally, the IRS tax code says if you are a 501c3, there's certain rules you have to follow to participate in advocacy work, right? So even the federal government wants us to be wary of what we see as advocacy, right? And so, I think it's important to focus on the fact that promoting social justice as it relates to advocacy, promoting social justice for many disenfranchised groups has to do with the understanding that members of the disenfranchised groups themselves have advocacy and that has, opportunities that have rarely been explored, right? And so, previous research indicates that the understanding that the understanding may be considerable, but understanding empirical evidence from research conducted in Glasgow, Scotland, this particular paper examines how the understanding expectations of advocacy held by Black and minority ethnic groups or services providers and the potential service users, right? And so these BMEs, as the study calls it, service providers, believe that they were offering advocacy and did so in the context of marginalized positions for their services, right? And the BME community members supported the development of advocacy strategies, but their own marginalization was in ways reinforced by the services that they were using or providing, right? And so these organizations who come in and say, we know how to help you raise and elevate your voice, but the things that they were doing in and of themselves were inequitable, right? And so are we allowing for folks to have space, a child care, time to get there, access, is it available via call? Are we taking into account those people on the third shift? Who are we inviting to the table, right? And so I think those things are important. So we have to be cognizant of those things. But Um, they had clear ideas about how appropriate advocacy services for those situations should go, and these ideas were grounded in their current situations and didn't necessarily conform to dominant ideas about advocacy. So, in conclusion, the prospects for successful advocacy are assessed in this study, but communities, in action, basically focus on another piece of research that was in the National Academy of Engineering and Medicine, and it's a pretty extensive report. Y'all should check it out or link to it. It's titled "Policies to Support Community Solutions," and what it says is communities operate in the context of federal and state policies that can affect local government and decisions relevant to health through laws and regulations, through the allocation of resources, and by shaping political will on issues and approaches. So among the more widely recognized policies are those that fund or regulate healthcare delivery services. But policies in a variety of areas, ranging from education to land use and housing and the environment, as well as criminal justice, can be relevant in healthcare disparities. These are all connected things, right? And so we try to look at them as disjointed, but they're not. Policies can vary significantly across geographic areas and over time, and establishing priorities provide funding or encourage collaboration. And we have to focus on the power in that collaboration piece. They can provide important opportunities for constitute barriers for promoting health equity. The policy context shapes the levers that are available to those communities to address change. So it seems reasonable to assume that the better informed communities are about the implications of federal, state, and local policy changes, the greater their ability will be to respond effectively to and address healthcare disparities and help achieve change of those social determinants and health determinants that we spoke about. And conversely, the more the needs of the communities are considered in decision-making process at the federal, state, and local level, the more effective those policies will be. In other words, policymakers have the opportunity to lay the groundwork for community success. That's their role. And I think we have allowed them to continue to be complacent in that role and haven't held them accountable. This policy context, i.e. socioeconomic or political drivers, it's highlighted in the report. And basically, frequently communities and health initiatives, including collaborative activities, sometimes limit their vision and advocacy to policy changes related to just their sector, whether it's healthcare or social services. So communities at the federal and state communities and the federal and state agencies that support them in their efforts to address these health disparities have multiple examples of how to follow in expanding their focus beyond healthcare and social services and examining opportunities in economic development, land use, housing, education, and criminal justice areas, which we have not traditionally always had to focus on to the ability to improve. Nonetheless, political or potential partners in those sectors are always working to improve outcomes, working to save money and achieve other political outcomes, agenda items. And I think what we have to do is focus on ways that we can support them. There are also policy changes that could be made at the federal, state, and local level across non-health domains that would remove barriers or create opportunities for communities to promote health equity overall. Many people assert that to attain health equity in the long term, policies that create structural barriers need to be addressing the root cause of those problems, not only treating the inequities themselves, has to be what our goal is. So, I think that answers your question. I just wanted to rehash the fact that we have to focus on these policies. We have to focus on, when I go back as an educator, what did we focus on to create better student outcomes and better student achievement? It's focusing in on common core standards. What are we expecting students to go through when they go through an education system? What are the resources that we're expecting them to come out with, understanding, and the skills that we want them to have? And let's focus on those, right? We can do a lot of things as it relates to making noise, as it relates to being frustrated, as it relates to complaining, but what can we do? What's the common core standards of how we change our outcomes in our communities? And I believe it's those policies and those organizations.
Thank you for that response. And as you were speaking, it reminded me of a book that I'm reading currently when we're thinking about those root causes. And one thing in this book by Daniel Dawes, Dr. Daniel Dawes from Morehouse. The foreword is written by one of the people that I admire greatly, Dr. David R. Williams, and he talks about the causes of the causes. And I actually have the book, it is sitting right here. It's called The Political Determinants of Health. So we always speak about the social determinants of health, but what are the causes of the causes? And that gets us to these political determinants of health and these systems, and how we really need to think about that so that we can implement true change. So thank you so much for that. I'll toss it
Absolutely.
to you, Shannon.
So in full transparency, Mr. Stockton, uh, Dr. Q and I, we started having this conversation about the school systems here in Shelby County. Okay.
Mhm.
They've been closed. Shelby County schools and Davidson County were the two districts still 100% in-home virtual. And there was this push to open up the schools from, I guess, an outsider trying to finagle the process to strong arm Shelby County schools to open up, although the statistics was saying otherwise. And so we kind of started having a conversation about that, and we started just thinking about advocacy and mental health and how poverty and inequalities play a part in the day to day for so many people. And so we thought it would be wise to bring you in so we can kind of have that this chit chat here. And one of the questions that I wanted to toss to you was, I know you ran for public office and gave that great effort. It was a great run, even during COVID-19, even during a pandemic. You were out knocking on the doors, kissing the babies, and doing whatever you need to do in order to win. You wanted to fight for the inequalities throughout the entire Mid-South. So the question, should it be alarming that all of the suburban and private schools were able to offer an in-school option sooner than Shelby County schools?
That's a great question. I mean, it kind of goes back to some of those advocacy and policy pieces that we were talking about earlier. But just to review some of the specific policy areas, specifically 6 that are discussed that we can use to focus on community-based solutions that advance health, equality or health equity. Is taxation, income inequality, housing, urban planning, education, civil rights, health, criminal justice, policy, right? Those are the things that we can focus on. I think this falls into one of those categories, at least one, right? So I think it's very, very, first of all, I told you I like to call myself a recovering candidate because it took a lot to recover from that. But I feel enlightened and excited that some of the things that I was able to learn and hear from the community members was that it's tough for them, and there's a disconnect in how they are able to communicate how tough it is. You participated in the efforts, and I want to just say thank you again. But as a former teacher, education was a huge, huge part of my platform. I still believe we need to get, as a part of my platform and my campaign, I still believe we need to get increased BEP or per pupil funding allotment for our students, and eventually get rid of that weighted formula system to more equitably fund our schools, right? And I think this plays into the question of why private and independent school systems or districts or smaller independent school systems or districts were able to open, and why Shelby County schools, Davidson County schools, and other larger districts weren't able to open. So just bear with me for a second. So as a former teacher, it's just a huge part of my platform. This BEP system places a value on enrollment targets and territory, not student success or outcomes. I also believe that teachers deserve more pay, and that was a part of my campaign. We have to pay our teachers. I've lived on a teacher salary, and if you asked me, could I do it again and be the man and the father that I am, and the husband I am, I would say no, right? I also believe it should not be alarming that those schools were able to open, because it is a direct reflection of the already deeply existing inequalities that plague us here in the Mid-South, especially in Memphis, Tennessee. So things such as voter disenfranchisement that still happens, or disparity in ability to get vaccines in a poor neighborhood. These things are connected. And so, let's call it what it is. Let's call the ability for these schools to open what it is. It's one of the last bastions of segregation in our public education system, in our education system. These private schools have the ability through funding and through private means to be able to, and nothing against that, but to be able to provide one-to-one technology on their campus prior to a pandemic. They have the lavish campuses and the resources to socially distance. These schools are funded and situated to face these issues well before the pandemic struck. And so, we have to ask ourselves, what is the state of our education system here in Shelby County or in Davidson County or Knox County? Well, what are the state of those education systems and how are we funding those? We can't expect for those school systems that are underfunded and systematically disenfranchised to, on a whim, be able to function like these multi-million-dollar funded institutions, right? Some of these institutions are more well situated than colleges, four-year colleges. And so I think we just have to focus in on that disparity there. And we have to focus in on the fact that this is very difficult for parents. It's a very difficult situation. We're in a situation where if you aren't blessed or have the opportunity to have a role where you can work remotely, you really have to choose between the safety of your child, their education, their well-being financially, for you being able to put a roof over their head, and then also the decision to return them back to school. I have a first cousin who travels for work, and recently was notified by his company he's going to be starting to travel again. And he has a daughter with type 1 diabetes and has high needs as it relates to educational needs, health educational needs. And it's a tough situation to ask parents to go through. But I think also, we have to look at, it's difficult because with the proper leadership and following the guidance of our local and our federal CDC, it really tells us what we should be doing. I had an opportunity to look at some research from a firm called Mathematica, who does advisement on policy and academic work. And they had they'd done some research, some modeling specifically around what it looked like in terms of transmission and infection rates in schools as it relates to the different stances that the school had on in-person, hybrid, virtual, or a matrixized version of those learnings. And so the research basically said that there's no safe situation. Every situation has a bit of risk. And so what we have to do as folks who are making decisions for young folk and folks who are leading institutions that are dealing with the situation is follow the guidance of the data, right? I'm strongly believe that the data will tell us what we need to do. And the data is telling me as a parent of a student in Shelby County schools that it's not time to send my son back yet, right? And the data in terms of what people feel from the parents is, there are parents who need an option, as it related to, just need. And that has a lot to do with wealth inequality, disparities as it relates to what requirements are for work. But a lot of this has to do with the fact that, we're looking at this as a problem, but really it's the root cause of this problem is overall general inequity. And so what we have to focus in on is making sure that our schools are positioned, that we're not using outdated per pupil BEP formulas to fund our school buildings, so that they can afford to put the proper filtration systems inside their school buildings so that our students can be safe, so that they can afford to make sure that they have the resources to open schools back up, and not do so until we have those things implemented. I don't think Band-Aids and short-term solutions make sense, which is why I think an overwhelming majority of parents have decided to keep their students at home. And so, we have to really look at that and understand that, as the last bastion of segregation, we have to focus on how we can integrate our public school systems so that the resources that are outside in the suburbs or outside in the independent school districts aren't hidden away from our students who need them the most.
I have to hop in just quickly, Shannon, I just have to thank you as an epidemiologist. I just have to thank you for looking at and understanding and speaking about the data and what it tells us versus our wants. Thank you.
Absolutely. No, you're welcome. I mean, we want a lot of things, right? We want a lot of things. We want to be able to go to restaurants. We want to be able to take our kids to theme parks. We want to be able to go to the park up the street with our children. We want to be able to feel comfortable again, but it's ill-advised. And the research and the data has shown that if we do that, it provides, it folds directly into the outcomes that we're going to see. Those behaviors, those actions directly correlated to increases in infection rates, right? And I'm so happy that we have a vaccine, but in talking about a vaccine, we have a huge issue where we have literally vaccines expiring because of the inability of our system to be able to implement them effectively. I'm not saying we shouldn't have slots or vaccines held for certain populations of people, but when those roles are filled or when those needs are met, we need to make sure that those who need or would like access to the vaccine have access to the vaccine, right? We can go on television all day and show people getting shots in the arm, but if your neighbor or you haven't gotten a shot, that doesn't help us, right? That's a PR campaign. In actuality, we actually need shots in arms, and we actually need people to be inoculated from the virus so that we can return to normal, not just cross our fingers and hope that it doesn't happen again, right? We don't have increases like we've seen in the past.
There it is. I think got a few more minutes. I know you've been so gracious with your time. I do want to ask this one question as we talk about the inequalities. We've talked about the school systems and how impactful education can parlay itself into success, right? Or a road of trials and tribulations if you're not prepared for that next stage in your life. But question I have: we have compromised education, jobs, housing. Tell me why water cannot be negotiated. Um, and I bring up this question because here in the Mid-South, lately, we chatted about this before we went live. After the winter storm, MLG&W, Memphis Light Gas and Water, the company here locally that governs or runs the water and electricity and gas here, issue an advisory that we had to boil water in order to use it. Boil it, let it come to a boil for 3 minutes before you're able to use it, not being able to digest it or anything like that. And so when that happened, instantly, I heard the murmurs, I heard the fears, the anxieties that, oh no, this is the start of what happened in Flint, Michigan. The first couple of hours, I shrugged my shoulders at it and thought, oh no, you guys are overreacting. And then day one went by, day two went by, and I start to read the tea leaves. I start to look at what's happening, the different pipelines and things of that nature. And then I start to compare what happened in Flint at the onset. And so, again, education, housing, we've put so many things on the line. Is water one of those things? Oil, is water one of those things that can be negotiated? How powerful is it? How much do we need it? Where does it fall on that line of inequality?
Well, it's huge because that nothing grows without water. Clean and quality water, right? Nothing grows without that. You know that. And I think, well, it's a multifaceted issue, just like many of the issues we've discussed earlier, and I think just on the student academic side, we know the adverse effects that lead can have on student development, right? We understand how who you and I would call exceptional learners have been impacted by by lead seeping into our water systems. And it's not just a Flint, Michigan water crisis. This is a national crisis. On a national level, I think it was the Army Corps of Civil Engineers did some studies that said that our federal water and electricity grid system both got a D minus on functionality. And instead of investing in infrastructure on a community level, on a state level, on a local level, on a federal level, we're focusing in on things that we consider priorities. But what is the priority if we can't have clean water? Like, where are we getting to if we can't have clean water? And so I think we have to, look back into some of the root causes of some of these issues. And, here in Memphis, we have water systems in parts of the city that are well over 120 years old. We have infrastructure systems that were built in the 70s that were only projected to last 20 or 30 years, and we're in the year 2021. And so those are priorities that are ultimately set by our elected officials, but really the accountability piece is on us, right? We continue to elect people into office who are not prioritizing these things. And instead of being proactive, what they're choosing to do is react to crises and problems that at which point they can do only mitigation techniques to address, right? And so we have to reimagine. We talk about jobs, we talk about quality jobs, we talk about opportunities and economic opportunities. But how many jobs would it create if, instead of deferring the maintenance on our water systems, we actually invested in those things, right? What would it look like if MLG&W, our water provider here in Shelby County, was held to account, because it is the people's water company, right? This is a company that has a charter that stipulates that the citizens of Memphis are the owners of this water company. We are the ones who need to hold the board accountable. We are the ones that need to be having conversations with the CEO of that organization to share with him that these are our priorities. If you're not moving forward with us on these priorities, we're looking for new leadership, right? We're looking for new policy leadership, new electoral leadership. We're looking for new mayoral leadership, because it doesn't make sense that on issue after issue, we are reacting instead of being proactive about the solutions. And I think, when we talk about the issues that we have as it relates to policy and activism on a state and local level, on a federal level, we can't continue to compromise, right? And compromise, it's an active word. It's not passive. We're making an active choice to continually allow the same thing to happen, because we're tired, because our job is requiring too much, because we have children at home, because we have a mortgage or rent to pay, because we're too busy to tune into those virtual meetings or go downtown and hold folk accountable, because we think so-and-so did an all right job, so we're going to just keep letting them serve us, right? What we need to be focusing on is actively choosing our government and our politicians to allow the system, the system with a capital S around us, to fail, as we are complicit in that failure. We can help by becoming more active and helping our neighbors and working with our community nonprofits and working with folks, and choosing not to continue to work in silos and working as a community. We can lastly stop actively choosing the outcomes for ourselves without realizing it. I think we are just as complicit as those people we put in office, because we don't realize our agency and our ability to make changes in those things. And you look at the Flint, Michigan water crisis, and the agency, the advocacy, the campaign that allowed us to know that they needed help in Michigan. At the time I was a teacher, and we were raising funds and water, money for funds and water to ship to Michigan. Again, that's reactive. How are we on the front end advocating for the changes we need to see in our community, and the changes we need to see in our neighborhoods that are going to make lasting, impactful change for not just me and you, but for our children and our grandchildren, because that is our investment. That is our fiduciary investment as citizens. That is our role as community members. And we're derelict of that duty by allowing folk to stay in office that are choosing not to make those priorities their priorities, and really ignoring what we're saying, because there are enough people who are saying that these are issues that we need to focus on, and folks are just choosing not to focus on them. And so we do have the bargaining power. My grandfather I think he sat on the board of the Tennessee Valley Association, which provides our electricity in Shelby County. And I think in some cases water. And so, there are avenues to make changes as it relates to those things, but we have to be in tune to what they are, who the players are, when are they meeting, how am I prepared for them? These are open meetings. There's a law in Tennessee, it's called the Sunshine Law, meaning that any public meeting legally has to be disclosed. Legally, they have to give you the opportunity to prepare for it. You have to have access to the agenda. They have to have open comment section. It has to, you have the ability to do these things. We have the ability to be a part of these efforts, but we're choosing not to be a part of them. And so I think, my call to action is, number one, vote. Number two, make sure that you find an organization, an individual, a group of people, whether it's just the people at the end of the block on the neighborhood who have conversations on Sunday afternoons, or it's groups that do advocacy work like Stand for Children, whether it's your local church organization, whether it is, simply having a blog or making a Facebook post that shares how you feel about this, and really insightfully implement some of the solutions that we've talked about here, are ways that we can take control of this and sort of bargain for what already is ours, right? We have the power and the ability and authority to change these things. We just have to empower ourselves to do that, right? We have to make time for those things, and we have to make sure that we are focused on, the quality of our water, and the sustainability of our electricity, and the environmental impacts that the decisions that we make on a daily basis have on our future sustainability for those things. And so I think, my ultimate goal is to continue to help empower people to advocate for those things, and just focus in on how we can make a change, in folks' lives, just like, you and I focused on when we were in the school environment. And so I think, on the academic side of things, folks that we focus on, in terms of in our education system. We believe in investing in policies and systems, but in our education system, equity has to be a high bar for us. And in order to provide that equity, I think what we focus on in my organization is a piece of literature called The Opportunity Myth. And I suggest folks go out and read that. And it's a really powerful document. So the Opportunity Myth is it's basically a research study that focuses on how we invest in policies and systems, right? And it focuses in on education specifically. And what happens is, so I believe that if we are going to invest in policies and systems before a crisis that leads to equitable educational practice, such as all students having access to high quality, grade level appropriate instructional materials, right? This is one of the key resources of the Opportunity Myth, and that access to a highly effective teacher, right? And a sense of deep engagement in what they're learning. And a teacher who holds high expectations for students and truly believes that they can meet and exceed grade level standards. Those are the same tenets, the core tenets that we have to bring to our engagement in our policy process. And our engagement in our advocacy process. We need to make sure we're using the highest quality materials, that we're working with people who have done this work before. We need to make sure that we are working with people that believe that we can impact change, and we need to make sure that we are challenging our elected officials to either implement this change or step aside, right? And so those are the things that I think we can focus on as it relates to water, as it relates to education, as it relates to consistency of electricity. Dr. Jackson, as it relates to trash pickup, those are the things that we can focus on, right? So I think those things are very, very important.
Absolutely. And to bring it all home, everything that we discussed today, ultimately, for Dr. Key and myself, impacts that overall mental health. And so trying to have that conversation about different advocacy avenues, because ultimately everything comes back to how is it impacting you mentally on that day to day. So Fearless Campaign, Dr. Q and myself, Mr. Stockton, it's been a treat, man. We
Thank
really,
you so
really
much.
appreciate you giving us this information to digest and not. I don't know if it was foreshadowing or not, but I'm very full after this conversation. So I look forward to collaborating with you. I know you at some point you're going to make another run at doing things for the people. I know you will. But in the meantime, in the between time, however way we can help with your causes and however way you can assist us with some of our causes, I look forward to great things. So thank you.
Absolutely. I appreciate it. I really, really appreciate it. And I thank you guys. I just want to take a second. I had an opportunity to download and review a few of the Nerdy Optimism podcasts through the Feelers campaign. And I just want to congratulate you guys on your work. I rated 5 stars on iTunes. And so I'm inviting everybody to go in and follow Nerdy Optimism and the Fearless campaign with Dr. Harvey and Dr. Jackson. And make sure you download that podcast. It's some really good jewels. And I think, especially in the time where we're all at home and we're all suffering from the new normal, really just focusing in on how you can provide self-care to yourself, right? And then recharging and rejuvenating your I've been able to use this podcast to rejuvenate my spirits and my mental health so that I can come back even stronger and focus on making those changes for the folks in our community. So I really appreciate you guys for the work that you're doing.
Much love, brother. All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both.
Progressive flow. Show me my competitors' race and let you see they ain't nothing like mine.